Hello and welcome to all. The ongoing coronavirus pandemic is of outstanding proportions, a global health crisis that has affected lives and livelihood of billions around the world. And I believe it is this dystopian atmosphere that has, for the lack of a better word, encouraged Anirudh Arun to write his second novel after a long gap of 7 years. The book, titled Plagued, a pandemic survivor story, it is based on the recent events happening around the world. And because it's such a troubling atmosphere, I think this book, in a way, brings out some positivity for the readers. And before I sort of get Anirudh into the discussion on how a microorganism has affected life and emotions and how it has sort of laid the foundation of a new world order, I would prefer him to sort of give an outline of the story of the novel for our viewers, and then I shall maybe discuss the plot and characters in detail. Hi, Anirudh.
Hey, Mudit. So thanks so much for that intro, and pleasure to meet everyone here. I started writing Plagued sometime around Feb, and that's when we just had started hearing about the virus spilling out of China and entering Europe. And it started more like an intellectual exercise, but soon transformed into something more urgent, something more immediate and important. That's because I realized that it was spiraling out of control, and I was trying to understand in what way I could contribute to the COVID crisis. And so that's why the entire idea of, all proceeds from the sales of the book going to COVID-19 relief, the idea came there, and that's how I chased the completion of the book, did night outs to actually complete the first draft, did a couple of edits, went through the entire, cover design. It was a pretty crazy time. And then I released the book. So the book itself is the story of a regular guy like you and me and his friends. Ved Agarwal is a software engineer based in the US. He's based in the Silicon Valley, and he ends up coming back to India, not to flee the virus, but because his father's retirement party is taking place in New Delhi. And incidentally, it is the same time that a pandemic outbreak happens across the world. And the story follows him, his girlfriend Ginny. His girlfriend Ginny is based in China, in Nanjing, which is somewhere between Shanghai and Wuhan, so in China. And both of them have had a comfortable life back in the US, but then they went back to their respective countries. And the rest of the story happens in 3 different countries. It happens in India, in China, and in the US. And you can see the situations unfolding in characteristically different ways. Each country handling the situation in ways that they think best, and each of them undergoing a very different experience. In some ways, they are united because they are undergoing the same discomfort, the same suffering. So that kind of unites them. But overall, it's a story of survival and hope of an average person in these countries who's looking to get past the situation of the pandemic, and also trying to forecast how this entire situation plays out in a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day, 100-day, 200-day kind of horizon. What happens to the world? What are those behaviors that completely change? What industries change? Ved's father is a senior politician in Delhi. So how is the politician's career affected? So these are all various things that I deal about in Plague. So do read the book if you get the chance, and the proceeds also go to COVID-19 relief.
Right. So while I had the pleasure of getting a free copy, I would definitely encourage everybody to buy. I think it's a 149 or 150. It's costing 150 on I think Kindle right now.
That's right. So it's 149 rupees on Amazon Kindle. You can get it in India. You can get it in the US. It's on Amazon.com. You can get it in the US store or in the India store or in the UK store. Wherever you are, it's available worldwide.
Yeah.
And and yeah, I mean, it's just $149, and it's a short read. It's a pacey read, and I guarantee you excitement for a Sunday afternoon, or I'm sure that you're going to have fun understanding it, trying to correlate it with your own thoughts of how the situation is going to play out, and then happy to have a discussion on what you think, and how much our ideas also connect. But the most important part is that 149 rupees, all the 100% of the proceeds that come to me all go to COVID-19 relief. Right now, in fact, I've just made the first tranche of money outgoing to the PM Cares Fund. I'm looking to do that on a rolling 15-day basis, so that the money keeps going to the people who need it right now.
Absolutely, that's a great cause, and we shall talk about it probably later in the discussion. Sure. I would now preferably talk about Ved, because that protagonist of the story is a young guy, an engineer, lover of electronic music, lover of Big Mac, and he's a careful guy, extremely careful guy, and his story revolves around maybe somebody like me or somebody like one of our viewers would be traveling with goggles and gloves and all those protective gear, and then end up being the survivor. Is there a real Ved? How did you imagine this character?
So the interesting part here is that you and me could be Ved, right? Either any of us could be Ved, any of us could be Ed, any of us could be Ginny, right? This is a very unique situation that the world is in right now, that the 7 odd billion people who live across the world are all united in the kind of in a single kind of experience, which normally would never happen, right? How many times could you say that somebody in Switzerland living in a chalet there, or someone in South Korea living in downtown Seoul can actually empathize with you living here in India, and everybody has it's a connected feeling. All of us are stuck at home. All of us are trying to do whatever best we can to survive, to move on, to grow during this period. We are all trying to take online courses. We're trying to do our own. We've become master chefs in the kitchen. But then mostly we are also we're also afraid. We are also thinking about how this whole situation is going to play out. Is it going to play out? How bad is it going to get before it starts getting okay again? So those are all questions that we all have. So I had the privilege that way of kind of looking into other people's lives, into my own life, introspecting, and kind of also talking to various experts in various industries, whether it is in finance, or whether it's in technology or in policy, to actually figure out how they see this situation playing out. What are the new challenges that have come out in their spheres of life, right? And how they're looking to tackle this, right? So and it's each person has a very, very unique learning. That's because their particular life is being affected in a characteristically different way, although it's the same virus that's affecting us all. So just to give you an example, I mean, think of what look at a popular, probably hair salon chain, right? Or maybe you could think of a Tony and Guy, or think of a Gitanjali, right? What is their life going to be after the COVID situation actually eases up and we start going out? I mean, the reason I've obviously taken a conscious call of not, having a shave during this period, but I haven't got a haircut, right? And I'm sure a lot of us haven't gotten a haircut unless we've taken the scissors ourselves and we've tried to, become, artists ourselves, right? But the thing is, once the situation eases up, there's going to be this, visceral fear of actually going to, the barber, or going to the salon, because that's someone who actually touches your face, and you don't even want to shake hands. You don't want someone to touch your face. You don't want someone to touch your hair. How is that going to play out, right? How are we going to go to like the sweet shop, and how are we going to buy sweets, right? Today there's the news of someone who was delivering pizza, and that has ended up affecting 73 different families, and now 73 different families are quarantined because one person has been found COVID positive, right? It's possible that there was no COVID positivity at the point when these deliveries happened, but all these are post facto analysis, and all these are lagging indicators. There is no leading indicator telling us the virus is going to come, because we're not testing that fast yet, right? There are certain countries that are testing that fast, and therefore they would be able to plan it out better. And that's something that I deal with in the book as well, wherein if you test faster, then what are the advantages you have, and how differently it plays out in your country as compared to a place where there is probably not enough testing yet. I hope that we also reach that level of testing where we are proactively testing and not reactively testing. But so yeah, I mean, all of these things are massively going to change, and I think that's kind of what you were asking me. I mean, we're going to see the world very differently in the next. We're already seeing it very differently, but it's going to remain different. It's going to remain a little alien to us in the next 12-18 months, is the way I see it.
Right. So while you do touch upon some of the points I wanted to cover, the novel has, in its own refreshing way, if I can say, it deals with some of the very topical things that we are facing as of now in our daily lives, like Slack channels going, bazooka at midnight, or Zoom calls, or even phone sex between Ved and Ginny. So how do you happen to include all these nuances? Is this an attempt to include because it's happening, you're hearing about it, you're talking about it, or it generally comes with characters like this?
So very good question, right? I mean, all of these things are ultimately, I mean, there are parts of it which I was able to project outwards, say 40 days down the line, 100 days down the line, based on the situation escalating. What are those few things that may potentially change, right? And of course, then there was a lot of reading that also went into it on how previous pandemics have played out, and there have been terrific works of both fiction and non-fiction on the Spanish flu, on the plague that affected Europe, right? And all of these actually gave us a lot of learning on how this could play out in our own situation, right? And the only it's by just luck and probably the grace of God, if you believe in God, that we are currently having the kind of connectivity and the kind of data science and the kind of technology today to deal with it. And we're able to anticipate and proactively probably build out a vaccine as the situation gets worse. These were not even privileges that were there back then, when you roll back a couple of centuries. Of course, you can argue that the entire situation today is because of, the kind of globalization and the kind of, microcosm the world has become, because people travel from everywhere to everywhere else. And that's how the virus in effect spread, which is true. But imagine another dystopian world where for some reason transportation had evolved and people could travel, but communication hadn't evolved so much, and probably data science hadn't evolved so much, biotechnology hadn't evolved so much. So there is an alternate universe out there where maybe people travel a lot, but people can't develop vaccines that fast, and that's probably the worst case scenario, right? And so there are various exercises that went there. And coming back to the actual anecdotes that you've brought in, there are certain things that as an author, there is a creative, expression that you bring out by trying to combine experiences, right? And I know that there may be a lot of writers out there who also have a different. I mean, I'd love to also understand, probably in the comments later, that how they go about their writing process as well. But one of the common things that a lot of authors do is try to visualize one experience and remove it from one setting and try to put it in another setting and imagining how that experience would happen there, right? That's a common thing, right? So right from whether you're talking about the phone call between Ved and Ginny, or you're talking about the way they go to the market to buy vegetables.
Yeah,
All of these things, if you kind of transpose it and try to visualize it in a slightly different setting, then suddenly it throws up different insights. It throws up a very different emotional atmosphere, and I think those are the nuances of trying to decipher what will happen in the world going forward, right? So
exactly.
trying to take today's experiences and think about if the situation got probably 10x worse, 100x worse, how would today's experience look like, right? So those are the kinds of experiments I've tried to do in order to build out the story. Again, the character remains very honest and truthful to the person that they are, but any of us could be affected by the oddity of this, the absurdity of this entire situation.
Absolutely. So there's this I think a conscious attempt made by you to include some commentary as well, and commentary that is very nuanced in a sense that God around the world was taking a break, and something like this. I mean, God is omnipotent and omnipresent, and He's taking a break. That sort of sums up the amount of the crisis that is unfolding in front of us. And then you've also somewhere through various figures of speech tried to comment on certain aspects of society, certain aspects of economy, certain aspects of politics. In one place you say China had hidden its suffering behind a red curtain, the red curtain being metaphorical of the communist regime. So what is this is this your personal idea into this particular novel, a commentary that tries to attract your view?
Well, I mean, it would. So there are two aspects to your question, right? The first part is, first of all, it is very difficult to alienate yourself, the author, from and your personal feelings from from the text that you put down on your on your paper or your Microsoft Word document, right? So that is something that is a natural flow, and I think that is the entire beauty of writing itself, because you're able to express yourself. That being said, in this particular scenario, I have also tried to be as distanced personally from the situation and tried to take a more third personly view of things. And yeah, I mean that's why, I mean, there are most of what happens through the eyes of any of the characters, predominantly Ved, right? And I have kind of taken a conscious choice of not making Ved like me, right? Which is what, I mean, probably my first book was where the protagonist was much closer to the author, and that's something that a lot of us do, wherein we try to make our initial characters are always like us or like the people that we know. But it's just that over the years, as you keep on writing, you're able to remove yourself from your characters. You're able to build up solid characters who can stand on their own, who may obviously borrow traits from people that you know, people that you have met, your acquaintances, friends, people you do not like. Obviously, those are things that will eventually happen, but obviously keeping yourself separate is something that I have definitely tried to do in this case. So any resemblance of Ved to me is purely coincidental, but I have consciously tried to make the protagonist of this book fairly different.
Yeah, but the subtle remarks are yours.
So the narrator remarks, yes. In fact, one of the initial questions that also came up with, in fact, my brother Ashray contributed a lot in terms of the plot and in terms of at least the geopolitics of this entire situation, of how it plays out, etc., etc. One of the questions that actually came out in one of our discussions was, is this a third-person narrative or a first-person narrative, right? And this is something that a lot of authors, a lot of writers also think about. And yes, I mean, I think I took a conscious choice of making it a third person narrative here. Although there could be really, it would be a very different characteristic work if it would be done as a first person
Yeah.
narrative. But the reason for choosing a third person narrative is because it could kind of give you like a god view on, you know, on the events playing out, right? And that allowed me to also shift scenes from one location to another and actually show the whole world as one in this entire situation, because this pandemic is actually being faced by everyone around the globe. And I felt that it would be a little bit of an injustice if I went into one person's mind and viewed it through that person's lens. So I think that difference came in there, and it was a very conscious choice to go with a third person kind of narrative rather than go through the mind of just one person. And just going through the mind of one person would be a wonderful exercise, and I wish, you know, someone actually, and I think there will be great literature that comes out of this, but it will probably come out maybe 12, 18, 24 months from now, because that's the kind of time it would take for someone to internalize this whole experience, actually go through the second degree, third degree effects of what is going to happen, and, you know, build out something truly beautiful from this whole thing. As it goes on, it actually becomes it becomes quite difficult to, you know, process the experience as the experience happens.
Yeah.
Right? I think any of us who write will be able to understand that it takes a little bit of time. It's like, you know, you just filled a bottle and you want the water to settle down, the currents to settle down in the water before, you know, you sip from it. So that sort of, you know, or maybe a glass of coffee, right? So that's the sort of thing that happens here. So you want it to actually to settle down. You want that experience to actually start making sense, maybe multiple layers of sense before you can actually. But here the difference happened that, you know, I wanted to make it for a cause. The book stopped being an intellectual pursuit and it started becoming more for the cause of COVID-19 relief. So it wouldn't make sense to release a book after 18 months. True. And then contribute to the cause. The cause is now, the money is needed now, so the story had to happen now. So obviously I did not have the kind of you know, the kind of advantage that a lot of us want, that you want to spend more time. But that also allowed me to, you know, take the brakes off and, you know, go no holds barred, and, you know, you had to complete, you had a deadline and you had to hit that deadline, right? So that actually helps a lot of writers, because then you start getting your paragraphs done, right? You start getting your pages done.
Yeah, but with a story like this, where you know, facts and figures are changing every hour, and perhaps each sunrise is more grim than the last one, how do you retain to that plot? Because your story also deals with the kind of change that are happening as the story progresses. So Wade's father who's really, you know, into the American politics and economy. He says the business is going normal, the economy is doing great, and then suddenly couple of days later you realize the market has tanked 15%. And how do you sort of incorporate that in your writing?
So I think one of the things that we do is there are various ways in which people approach this, right? One way to obviously approach it is, and I have done like multiple of these options in the past. So when I wrote my first book, I started it without an idea of the ending. So I realized that I wanted to start writing, and then as I wrote, the story told itself to me, and I just continued on, and obviously the first draft then ends up becoming. I mean, it's very fluid, but there are a lot of excesses, and it may be a little rambling. So the second draft that becomes, you know, you need to become, you know, a butcher with the a second draft, where you're actually trimming down that first draft and trying to, you know, make much more sense of it, which is one way of writing, of course, because you don't always know where things are going. The second time I tried to do it around, and the second book, I've written 4 manuscripts, out of which 2 have currently, one has been published. But the second manuscript that I wrote I approached it more like a science guy, like an engineering guy, wherein I said that, look, this is the plot, this is how the characters are. I tried to plot them, and I tried to say that this experience would make this character more like this, and then try to live that character's life, and then try to see how that happens. But there you have various, you have a framework, and then you have to work within that framework and write. So that's another way of approaching it, right? So wherein you create that framework and you try to stick to that framework, and you move on. The third one that happened here is that the only framework that I set myself for in terms of Plagued was the macrosphere, wherein what is happening to the world seemed to make a lot more sense to me, because I think there were certain strong currents regarding what might happen. There were a lot of experts I consulted in various industries to basically figure out what might happen in their particular fields. So in terms of the macrosphere and how people would react in different countries, started making a lot of sense. But how would these affect the characters? I did not create a framework for that. So that I allowed myself to live it as I wrote. So as I wrote it, the story started making more sense, because I knew what is going to happen to the world outside. But how are Ved and how are Mr. Agarwal and how are the house help and Ginny and Ed and Jeff? How are these guys all affected, right? And what happens to their lives in context to the geopolitical scenario, or that is playing out. That's something that that sometimes surprises you, and that's something that is also there are those moments of joy when you write, because suddenly a situation resolves itself for you. I think sometimes authors say, and when you talk to like people who have who have reached the pinnacle of writing, they say that on days they can obviously look 2 pages ahead, and then there are certain days where you can look 200 pages ahead, right? So those revelations actually start happening, and those revelations are actually, and when those revelations happen, you suddenly feel limited by the speed of your fingers, because the story is playing out much faster in your head, but you can't keep pace when you're typing it out, or when you're writing it with a pen, right? So that starts happening, and so obviously there are two different things. Sometimes you're trying to force yourself to write, because you need to have a process in order to complete, right? Luckily for Plagued, and I don't know, I think it's just pure luck that I did not have a moment of writer's block at any point of time. I never felt at any point of time that I had to write because it's the time that I had blocked out on my calendar to write. At every point of time, I felt that, wow, the story is going ahead. I need to keep pace. So that was the kind of, the feeling I had throughout when I was writing the book.
But how difficult or easy was it, this process of self-publishing for you?
So, good question. And in fact, a lot of people have been also asking me and, emailing me over the last few years, in fact. And earlier I had never done self-publishing, right? I had done, only traditional publishing. And now after doing the Kindle-based self-publishing, what I can tell you is they're very different. And I've realized that there's no good or bad. The differences are in the traditional publishing world. Obviously, one thing that is paramount is credibility, because if there's a Penguin or a Harper or any of these top publishers like a Pan Mac or whatever, one of them say that this is a book that they're going to pick up to publish, and they actually put their publishing powers behind you, right? Then obviously it's obviously a personal victory. There is a lot of credibility that comes in, and obviously once that commitment of royalty also comes in, and that advance payment that comes into a writer, etc., that makes them also invested in that entire process, and therefore in order to make business sense for them, they will make sure that they go out there and they promote the book the right way, right? So I think that's very very important for traditional publishing. However, on the flip side, the negative side of traditional publishing is that unfortunately, it's more like there are gatekeepers, right? So they are people who, if you've read the trial from from Kafka, there's actually a gatekeeper who stands in front of the protagonist, and he actually closes the door. So in a way, the publishers are like that. The world is behind that gate, and there are publishers who are holding that gate for you. And oftentimes, it so happens that publishing, in a way, is a very close knit kind of society. It's only those people who start talking to each other, influencing each other's opinion, and the same thought influencers are propagating. They have a particular kind of idea of the world, and those are the ideas that they would kind of allow to enter after they open the gate. And there are other ideas that they may not permit, right, for whatever reason. And obviously today it has become even stranger, because today, to publish, people ask you crazy questions like, how many people do you follow you on social media, right? So they would have a higher chance of investing in you and publishing your book if you can go out there and tell them that you have 500,000 followers on Instagram, right? Which actually makes the publishing process much worse. But it is true, it happens, right? That being said, what happens in self-publishing is obviously it's a much heavier onus on the writer. First of all, the question of you feel like an imposter. The imposter syndrome starts kicking in, because you're like, am I even allowed to publish? I mean, there are people who are published by Penguin, there are people who are published by top class publishers out there, and here I am, like, publishing my own book. What makes me even think, am I vain in thinking that people are going to invest their time in reading my book, right? So that's a question that a lot of us would have, and there are no correct or wrong answers, right? I mean, ultimately, someone might think that someone might throw a shoe at me and say that this is the worst book I've read, you've wasted 2.5 hours of my life, right? It's possible. There are other people who will come back and say that, wow, this is nice, I felt good after reading it, I learned so and so, I think let's connect for a chat, it's wonderful, thanks for writing the book, etc. And those are things that really keep you going. What I'm making as a point for self-publishing is that self-publishing has democratized the entire industry. So everybody currently has a voice, just like you have a voice on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram, right? You have a voice in long form writing, in the form of publishing traditional books. So that way, the Kindle process, and the reason I chose self-publishing here right now is that I didn't even write a single query letter to a publisher, because I realized that they have a process of 3 months that they would consider it, and then 3-4 months later they would come back with suggestions, and then I would work on something else. Maybe it would take another 8 months for that book to actually see the light of day. And I wanted to publish right now, here and now, right? That's a great option for self-publishing, right? That being said, in self-publishing, you're also limited by, you need to build your own credibility, because you don't have the heavyweights on your shoulders saying that, and it's not like you're firing off the shoulders of, one of those heavyweights.
Publisher, yeah.
You are out there, right? And you need to like make that credibility for yourself. You need to go out there, get your initial readers. You need to go out there, get your initial reviews. And you need to obviously discover ways to spread the word about your book, right? And that takes a lot of effort. So, in fact, I was one of the things that I would love to tell people here who are writers is that when I wrote my first book, and in fact, a lot of traditional writers, and again, I would say that this is my view. You needn't agree with me, but and initially, I also thought that when you write a book, you should not market it, right? I thought that writing should sell itself. People will pick it up if it is quality writing, and it felt unethical to market a book, right? It felt unethical to even talk about it. You felt that you wrote it, that's it, my job is done. Now people will start buying it, they'll read it, and they'll figure it out. And then you are met with that immediate disappointment and that disillusionment that, okay, fine, it's out there, but who is reading it? How many people have read it? Why have only 100 people read it? Why only 1,000 people read it? Why can't more people read it? Why are people reading that book when that book is probably, in my opinion, not as good as mine, but they're reading that book, right? This time I approached it differently. I understood that, again, the good part is the cause helped me it kind of removed the shame of marketing, so to say, because the idea is when you do it for yourself, at least you feel like you're doing something selfish. But when you're doing something for a cause, it gives you more agency. So when you are actually raising money for COVID-19 relief, now I feel a little more free in terms of talking about it, in telling people to read it, because now I don't feel like I'm doing it just for myself, right? So that's one good part. But what I'm saying is, when you're doing self-publishing, you have to go out there and talk to people. You have to do it, right? The other challenge with self-publishing is that distribution, right? The challenge is, and in India, it's not really a solved challenge, because even if you go on the Kindle store and you list yourself in Kindle India, unfortunately, Kindle India doesn't give the author too many marketing tools. Okay. So if you think of Kindle if you think of Kindle as a store, like a bookstore that you walk into, right? It's just on your mobile screen or your computer screen. But imagine it's a physical store and you're walking in, right? Kindle is only going to show you, like, they only have like 10 shelves or maybe 50 shelves, right? And those are lined maybe 10 shelves, and maybe there are like 50 books, five books in each shelf. Maybe 50 books are all you can see, right? And they have lakhs and lakhs of books. And there's a very high probability that your book is not in the top 50. Now, even the 51st book is not very discoverable by the person who's visiting that store, right? In marketing, you have a concept of, like, you're actually figuring out how your merchandising looks in stores. You want to make sure that your book cover, anything that you're trying to sell is
the visual aspect,
visible, right? You need to be able to see it. Unless people see it, they would not pick it up, and if they pick it up, they may like it. But if they never see it, then you will never know if they like it or not. Right, so you will never, unless you go out there and you tell a reader to read it and you find ways for getting readers. I mean, is your writing good or is it bad? You don't know. There is no answer there, right? It's just because nobody is reading it doesn't mean your writing is bad. It may be that nobody is able to discover it. Obviously, if a lot of people discover it and they all hate it, then yes, maybe you need to go and figure out what happened there. But so I would say that you need to find out innovative ways to actually market it. In the case of this particular book, especially in the COVID-19 scenario, the printing of books is pretty much off. No printing is happening out there. So it's a pure ebook right now. A lot of people have been asking for a paperback. So I might come out with a paperback, and that will also be for COVID-19 relief. I don't want to make money from that book as well. But yeah, paperbacks may also come. But once the paperbacks come, right now it's still limited by the Amazon store. My next challenge would be then, how do I get it out to more places? Can I get it stocked up? So those are the challenges in self-publishing. The advantages is that anybody can write, anybody can publish. But the challenge is that how do you get people to read? And in the other case, they will get people to read, but how do you convince them that you are the guy they need to publish, right? Or you are the girl that they need to publish.
Right.
So that is those are the major differences.
Yeah. Sort of both worlds have their own battles to fight. But
however, one point I want to make here, and it's a very limited point: if you are publishing a book through a traditional publisher, do not pay them.
Sure.
Okay, so I get a lot of mails from a lot of people saying that, look, I've been told that this publisher, so-and-so publisher, is going to publish me, and they're asking for 30,000 rupees or they're asking for 1 lakh rupees. No, that is not how it works. Unless they pay you an upfront amount, do not go ahead with them. It's better to self-publish than give money to someone, because ultimately what are they going to do? They're just going to print 100 books. They're going to do a print run. They will show you proof that there are so many books in their go down, and that's it. They have no incentive to promote your book. They are making money from the author and not from the reader. So you do not want to go down that road, right? So never, when you're going through traditional publishing, never pay someone.
True. So that said, with the self-publishing, how important is the role of an editor here?
So it's super important, right? The role of an editor is super important in all forms of writing. And the advantage that you have with traditional publishers is that obviously these are people who are, high caliber editors who probably know how, they've probably edited hundreds of books in the past. They have, they know how, what readers want, what works, what doesn't work, and they would actually, they would actually be able to give you a lot of constructive feedback, and they would be able to help you out a lot there. When it comes to self-publishing, again, you will need to consult people who will be able to give an independent view of what your book is, and also help you make all those, all those corrections. And by editing, a lot of people think that editing is just punctuation and, fixing spelling mistakes and stuff. That is not editing. Editing is right from writing style to, certain parts may not feel like they connect to the flow of the entire book. There are certain parts where you may be doing something, but you may be able to do it in a much better way. There are certain parts which may sound cheesy, and that's unimaginative, banal. So I mean, there could be various things that the editor will be able to tell you, right? So those are things that are definitely possible here. In fact, my wife Anubha was actually the person who, went through the various drafts and helped me out. Again, we were very short on time, so I think we did. I hardly had time to do maybe 2.5 drafts. Maybe the first draft was corrected into a second, and then the second had minor edits, and the third draft was ultimately had to go online because I had set a deadline on Kindle Store to go live. So yeah, I mean, that's the kind of timelines with which I work. But ideally, you want to spend a lot of time. In fact, a lot of people spend more time in their second draft and their third drafts than the first draft itself, because the first draft is a very organic kind of a draft wherein you're doing, you're having fun, right? You're having fun. And as the saying goes, they say, write drunk and edit sober, right? So the reason is because when you're writing, you want to be expressive, and you're letting the flow happen. You're not trying to restrict yourself. And then after that, you will need to be very brutal with the text, and that takes a lot of time to. Once it is there, once the words are formed, it's much more difficult to change them than change the words when they're not there at all. So yeah, that's a learning that all of us have as we write.
Yeah. Right. So the story, I think, really unfolds in a positive tone, and I would not like to sort of discuss the story, how it unfolds in the later half, especially after Ved contracting the virus, and then how things go from there. But I would like to talk of the new sort of world order post the pandemic, not the one that has been discussed in the novel, but the one that you see could unfold maybe 6 months from now.
Right. So I think so. First of all, Plagued. I mean, I made a conscious attempt to try to make it based on a pandemic, but it is not the coronavirus. I mean, it happens at a different level. Yeah. There are different things that happen there. That being said, there are obviously a lot of parallels to what we can see in our world that are going to unfold. What I think would potentially happen are, multifold. First of all, I think all of us are going to become very, very conscious when it comes to health and hygiene. And I think that's going to be a very, very positive takeaway from this situation, right? That, I mean, people are hopefully, even in UP, going to stop spitting pan on the road. Right, and
let's hope, yeah.
and if that, I mean, those would, those kinds of changes will start happening. People will start washing their hands regularly and probably start using soap. So I think that's going to be a very positive thing as well. There are going to be some fears and scars that we're going to be left behind with, which is kind of like, I mean, think about how you're going to, go to restaurants. Right, and if you look at how and before we go into into various anecdotes of how these things might play out, what I feel is going to happen here is that I feel we are going. It's a test match that we are faced with. So it's like a test match versus coronavirus, but we are trying to play it as a T20, right? So it's like world versus coronavirus. You have to play 5 days with coronavirus, right? You can't retire before 5 days. But we are saying that we will play only 20 overs, and after 20 overs we will end the game. But that's not going to be true. It's going to remain a test match because the rules are determined by the virus and not by us, right? And by that, what I mean is that these lockdowns are going to prevent. They're going to prevent the situation from getting worse. It's going to help our healthcare system to cope, right? So flattening of the curve means flattening of the curve. It doesn't mean killing the curve, right? I mean, the curve isn't dead. So eventually what happens is when the world opens again, the fears will resurface because there will be second outbreaks, there will be things that start happening. So there will be a different kind of life that we will start slowly adapting to. For example, we may not travel as with, except maybe for two family members traveling together. Maybe a stranger never sits in the back seat of my bike, right? So maybe a bike taxi system would kind of not happen. Maybe bike taxis will become very difficult to operate. Similarly, going to restaurants, one thing that restaurants will have to do is they'll have to kind of space out their tables. And I think China and South Korea have already started doing wherein certain bits of this, wherein they put partitions between people and they allow you to face one direction and stuff like that. So some of those pieces will start playing in. But the roll-on effect of this is when the restaurant has to space out tables and widen and improve gaps between tables, it effectively means that there will be lesser number of tables in that given floor space, which means there will be lesser number of customers that they can handle. But the costs of the restaurant will remain similar. So the price of food that they will serve to you will go up. So you will see all the menu cards with slightly higher pricing than what you saw before, because now they're going to have to make their unit economics work with lesser number of people coming, and that's going to happen with airlines as well. And that's going to probably happen with mobility of moving on the roads as well, right? There may be like certain surprises for us. Maybe instead of car sales going down, car sales might actually go up because people may become afraid of, instead of taking a public transport or something, they may actually choose to buy their own car, right? So there may be positive surprises that play out, right? That being said, I think there are certain countries that have coped very well with this situation, and there are certain countries that have not coped so well. The US being one of those countries that have not coped so well. So when we're talking about the new world order again here, I think one of the things that we might end up seeing is that the US, the world might end up, and it purely depends on how this situation plays out, how long it plays out. Because the longer it plays out, the unipolarity of the world is diminishing, right? I mean, I think it's no longer, the playground of the US. I think there is a very, very resurgent China that is in. There are a lot of conspiracy theories that I talk about in the book as well. But conspiracy theories notwithstanding, I think, and obviously how much of that data is true that they are reporting in terms of how many new deaths, how many new cases they have. Maybe they're not reporting the truth. Maybe the red curtain is real. I mean, it is real, but how much of the truth is happening, we don't know. But that being said, because it's the kind of country that they are, and they've been able to bring their industries back to a certain level, the kind of market share they have in global trade may start changing. They're already investing a lot in equities in different parts of the world. So asset ownership, company ownership, there is going to be a lot of change in terms of how China is going to start influencing even the developed parts of the world. They've already established their superiority in the South China Sea and in Southeast Asia. But I think now Europe and Africa has also seen Chinese, major Chinese influence. But right now you're going to see that actually crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and the US is going to start feeling it. And when the US starts feeling it, I feel that there may be a lot of abrasiveness that starts happening, especially with President Trump. and especially with the US elections coming up soon as well, this will have a significant bearing on how the people of the US actually perceive their elections going forward. It may very well be not even construed as a very peacetime kind of election. In fact, one of the flavors that I see playing out is, one is obviously the way the pandemic was handled, and one side will say that it was very poorly handled by the government. I'm sure that is going to be one rhetoric. I think the counter rhetoric to that is going to be from the Republican side in the US is going to be that uh, uh, he's going to talk about how China is getting more and more dominant, and the US needs to bring back manufacturing and stuff. So those are the two major rhetorics. Now, are you going to be anti-China, pro-US, or are you going to call this government for failing to handle the pandemic in a better way? So I think those are the two conflicting theories on which this election might play out in the US. That might happen. Hopefully in India, I mean, we will keep a little bit of containment on the situation, but with 1.3 billion people, it's going to be, I mean, one flare up here and there, and we are back to ground zero. So I mean, those things are going to be a risk. So I think till now we've been doing an admirable job, but hopefully we'll continue doing so. And I hope that the healthcare investments in India really start going up. I think that's the one single learning that we will have, that the investments in healthcare and hospitals and beds will actually go up seriously.
Right. And maybe even also try and formalize most of the informal sector, and it'll be easier to pass on benefits like that. Maybe. Yeah. Let's hope on those lines. Couple of questions before I close it. Any advice for young writers, self-publishers, or those who have stories to tell, maybe a COVID-19 story or a personal story?
So, first of all, I mean, ultimately it's going to sound like cliche, but in order to be a good writer, you need to be a good reader. So it's very important to read, and it's important to read very diverse literature. It could be fiction, non-fiction. You'll have to read across themes, across types of authors. You would need to read different points of view. So that is something that is very important. I would say, right? And I would also encourage people to focus on the kind of things that they are most familiar with, and the topics they feel about most strongly. It may be about you may feel about technology, you may feel about gender equality, you may feel about health and social issues. I mean, it could be anything, but you would I mean, ultimately, in order to do justice, you will apart from reading wide, you will also have to read deep in these particular topics, right? So I think those are two pieces that that I would encourage very strongly. And after that, I would obviously say that the second step to writing after reading is obviously to write, because a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of us have that habit that we say that we are writers, but I mean, it's good to call oneself a writer. I think the point where we become a writer is when we start acknowledging ourselves as one. But ultimately, without putting words to paper, you are only a writer in your head. So you will need to take that time out. You will need to create a process of writing. And this is something that I have been guilty of myself, that my habit breaks at times, especially because we have, I mean, most of us, I'm assuming, have other jobs as well. And writing is unfortunately not something that can sustain a lot of us full time. But yeah, I mean, even with other things happening, and especially with other things happening, it's very important to take time out and write. And which means if you probably block out time in your calendar every day, and even if it's difficult on that day, you still sit in front of your screen or sit in front of your paper and try, right? I think that is something that that is very important. And I think that entire process itself helps us. I think this entire circle starts happening then, that we read and then we try writing, and then we read and then we try writing. And I think that's how the entire, way our thoughts are distilled, our words, our language becomes better. I think that's something that's very important. And obviously, the third piece of this whole thing is ultimately you can be a writer and a closet writer, and I mean it's perfectly fine that you can be a closet writer and keep your words and and lock them away or put them in an online obscure link and don't give that link to anyone else. But ultimately, if you are truly looking to get published at some point, you should be fearless and you should put it out there and then wait for what people think. I mean, ultimately let people come back and say whether what they think, and that actually helps you a lot, because otherwise you're just it's just an internal process. The moment you start involving more people, it starts becoming a more expedited kind of process, right? So that's something that I would encourage.
Right. So I think your first book, The Steadfast and Soldier, came in 2013, and then it took an outbreak of this proportion to get you into writing again, and you already have a couple of manuscripts ready. Do you want to just share some themes about those that are coming, and by when your readers can expect them to be out?
So technically, I'd written two books. One was called MR19, and one was called Nobody Remembers Ram. And both of these were completed sometime in 2014, 2016 or. And the reason I was not able to pursue them to the full is because I reached various stages of discussions with top publishers, but then I got a lot more feedback regarding what I needed to work on. And ultimately, I'm also a startup entrepreneur, so I started getting very deeply engaged with my startup at that point, and that started pulling time away from me. That's what I felt, and I became guilty of the exact same thing that I was talking about just before this, right? That I did not go back and I did not do justice to that piece, and I did not go back and work on the second draft, third draft, fourth draft, because when you do that, that's when the book ultimately goes through these publishing agencies and they see the light of day. So I think that's something that did not happen. Now, will they happen down the line? Possibly, yes. I think I feel a little recharged and rejuvenated after Plagued. And I will definitely give that another shot. The advantage of both those stories are they are timeless stories. And I think whether you read them now or hopefully if you read them 20 years, 30 years from now, they may have a different impact on you, but I hope they would have an impact on you. So it's not a time-bound story that if you don't read it in 2020, the story will become stale. I've tried to make a much deeper kind of work there. I'll definitely keep people posted on how those things work out. But right now I'm totally focused on on Plagued and the COVID-19 relief mission. I really hope that people go to the Kindle store and back the campaign and actually read the book and tell me what they think. I mean, it would be lovely if you actually read it and tell me your thoughts on what you feel about Plagued, a pandemic survivor story, and any constructive inputs, any of your thoughts, how you found it, would be lovely to know. So I think that's something that I'm very excited to know about, how you feel about Plagued, and looking forward to those reviews coming in.
Sure. I mean, it's for a cause, and I would also sort of appeal to readers who are out there who want to read something refreshing in these sort of disturbing times. I think it's a quick, pacey book to go through, and then you could probably hand it down to your siblings 3-4 years down the line. It's such a story to be told. So I wish you all the luck with the book, and I hope more and more people read it and they stay home and they share this with you, the feedback.
Thanks so much, Mudit. And as I have a campaign on Twitter running, it's called Read More, Save Lives. We know that we've heard stay home, save lives, but I've added stay home, read more, save lives. And that's the entire book. That's what the book is all about. Read more. So it's something that during this lockdown, it's something that you could spend some time reading, enriching yourself, thinking about how this thing is going to play out. And in the process, you are contributing towards COVID-19 relief. So that's the whole endeavor. And it's been lovely talking to you, Mudit. So, and thanks for reading the book, and thanks for all those insights and inputs. I mean, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure doing this.
Thank you, Anirudh. It's been our pleasure as well. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking with NewsBytes.
Thanks so much. Pleasure is all mine. And
Yeah.
thanks so much. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.